The crack of a whip echoed through the dusty streets of Keeler, California, followed by the pained scream of a woman that cut through the evening air like a knife. Rose Whitfield stumbled backward against the rough wooden wall of the bunkhouse, her cheek stinging from the blow that George Hoffman, the ranch foreman, had just delivered. The year was 1878, and in this remote corner of Inyo County, a woman's refusal could carry painful consequences. "You'll learn your place, girl," Hoffman snarled, his weathered face twisted with rage and wounded pride. "No kitchen maid refuses me and keeps her position at the broken spur." Rose wrapped her arms protectively around herself, tasting blood where her lip had split. At 22, she'd already endured more than most women twice her age, but she would not surrender her dignity, not even if it meant losing the only employment available to her in this parched desert town. "I would rather starve than share your bed, Mr. Hoffman," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around her pale face. "Mr. Camden hired me to cook, not to warm your sheets." Hoffman's face darkened further. "Camden ain't here, is he? He's back east for another month, and I run things when he's gone. You've got till sunrise to reconsider, or you'll wish you'd never set foot in Keeler." He stormed away, leaving Rose alone in the growing darkness. She slid down the wall, her legs no longer able to support her. The Broken Spur Ranch was the largest employer in the area, and George Hoffman ruled it with an iron fist while the owner, Thomas Camden, was away on business. Rose had only been working there for 3 weeks, having arrived in Keeler with little more than the clothes on her back and desperate for work. She touched her swollen lip gingerly. This wasn't the first time Hoffman had cornered her, but it was the first time he'd struck her. His advances had grown more aggressive with each passing day, and now she faced an impossible choice: submit to his demands or lose her position and likely face worse. As night fell completely over the ranch, Rose made her decision. She would not stay another night under the same roof as George Hoffman. With trembling hands, she gathered her few belongings into a small bundle. She had nowhere to go, but anywhere seemed better than here. The ranch hands were gathered in the main bunkhouse, their raucous laughter carrying through the thin walls. None had intervened when they'd heard her cry out earlier. Some were afraid of Hoffman. Others simply didn't care about the fate of a kitchen maid. Rose slipped out the back door of the cook's quarters and into the cool desert night. The town of Keeler was 3 miles away, a difficult walk in the dark, but she had no choice. She would find somewhere to hide until morning, then try to secure passage on the next stagecoach heading anywhere but here. The moon provided just enough light for her to navigate the rutted dirt road. Every shadow made her jump. Every distant coyote howl sent shivers down her spine. She was halfway to town when she heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching, her heart hammering. Rose ducked behind a large boulder just off the road. Had Hoffman discovered her absence already? Had he sent men to bring her back? The hoofbeats grew louder, and Rose pressed herself against the cool stone, praying she wouldn't be discovered. The riders passed without slowing, and Rose released the breath she'd been holding. 3 men on horseback, heading toward the ranch. None of them had the bulky silhouette of George Hoffman. When their forms had disappeared into the darkness, Rose continued her journey toward town. By the time she reached the outskirts of Keeler, her feet were blistered and her body aching from the physical and emotional trauma of the day. The small mining town was mostly dark, with only the saloon still showing lights and signs of life. Rose hesitated. A respectable woman had no business approaching a saloon at this hour, but she was desperate and had nowhere else to go. Perhaps they needed help in the kitchen, or maybe there was a kind soul who could direct her to safer lodging. She approached the weathered building, wincing at the pain in her feet with each step. The Silver Strike Saloon had seen better days, but it was the heart of Keeler's limited nightlife. Through the windows, she could see men drinking, playing cards, and a few women in colorful dresses moving among the tables. Before she could reach the door, it swung open, spilling lamplight and the sounds of a tinny piano onto the boardwalk. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered. In the dim light, Rose could make out the shape of a cowboy hat and the glint of spurs on his boots. "Excuse me," she said softly, then immediately regretted drawing attention to herself. The bruises on her face would be visible even in this poor light, and her disheveled appearance would surely raise questions. The cowboy turned, and Rose found herself looking into the most penetrating blue eyes she'd ever seen. They widened slightly as they took in her appearance. "Madam." His voice was deep but gentle. "Are you all right?" Rose opened her mouth to respond, but the events of the day caught up with her at once. The world began to spin, and darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was the stranger rushing forward as her knees buckled beneath her. When Rose regained consciousness, she was lying on a narrow bed in an unfamiliar room. Panic surged through her, and she sat up quickly, ignoring the pain that shot through her head at the sudden movement. "Easy now," came a woman's voice. "You're safe here, honey." Rose turned to see an older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple dress and a concerned expression. "Where am I?" Rose asked, her voice scratchy. "You're at my boarding house," the woman explained. "I'm Martha Jenkins. Brock Callahan brought you here after you fainted right in front of the Silver Strike. Poor man was beside himself, carrying you in here like you might break." Rose's hand went to her cheek, feeling the tender swelling there. "How long have I been unconscious?" "Just an hour or so. It's still the middle of the night." Martha sat on the edge of the bed. "That's quite a mark on your face. And it's not the only one, is it?" Rose looked down, noticing that her sleeves had been rolled up, revealing the finger-shaped bruises on her forearms where Hoffman had grabbed her. "Who did this to you, child?" Martha asked gently. The kindness in the woman's voice broke something in Rose. Tears welled up and spilled over before she could stop them. Between sobs, she told Martha about her position at the Broken Spur, Hoffman's advances, and her desperate flight. Martha listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. When Rose finished, the older woman stood and poured a glass of water from a pitcher on the dresser. "Drink this," she instructed, handing it to Rose. "You're dehydrated and exhausted. You'll stay here tonight and we'll figure things out in the morning." "I can't pay you," Rose admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "I have very little money." "We'll worry about that later," Martha said firmly. "For now, rest. You're safe here." As exhaustion pulled her back toward sleep, Rose heard voices outside her door, Martha, and a man speaking in low, urgent tones. The deep voice must belong to Brock Callahan, the cowboy who had found her. Their words faded as sleep claimed her once more. The next morning, sunlight streaming through the curtains woke Rose. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up slowly, her body aching in a dozen different places. A soft knock came at the door, and Martha entered carrying a tray. "Good morning, dear. I've brought you some breakfast and fresh water to wash up with." "Thank you," Rose said, genuinely touched by the woman's kindness. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Martha set the tray on a small table. "Eat first, we'll talk after." The simple meal of eggs, bacon, and biscuits was the most delicious thing Rose had tasted in weeks. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite touched her lips. While she ate, Martha laid out a clean dress on the bed. It might be a bit large, but it's better than those clothes you slept in, she explained. After washing and changing, Rose felt marginally better, though her face in the small mirror above the wash basin was a shock. Her left cheek was mottled purple and yellow, her lips swollen and crusted with dried blood. No wonder the cowboy had looked so alarmed. When she made her way downstairs, she found Martha in a cozy sitting room, talking with a man who rose to his feet as she entered. It was the cowboy from the night before, Brock Callahan. In the daylight, she could see him clearly, tall and lean but powerfully built, with sun-bronzed skin and those remarkable blue eyes under the brim of his hat. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair and a clean-shaven face that set him apart from many of the rough men in Keeler. "Miss Whitfield," he said, removing his hat. "Glad to see you're up and about." "Mr. Callahan," Rose acknowledged. "Thank you for your help last night." "I apologize for the inconvenience." "No apology needed, madam." His eyes lingered on her bruised face, and something dark flickered across his features. Martha gestured for Rose to sit. "Brock here works at the Double C Ranch just north of town. He's Thomas Camden's nephew." Rose's blood ran cold. "Camden? As in the owner of the Broken Spur," Brock nodded. "My uncle owns both ranches. I manage the Double C for him." "Brock has been telling me about George Hoffman," Martha continued. "It seems you're not the first woman he's mistreated." Brock's jaw tightened. "Hoffman's a snake. My uncle doesn't know half of what goes on at the Broken Spur when he's away, but he will soon enough." "What do you mean?" Rose asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "I mean I'm riding to the Broken Spur today," Brock said, his voice hard with determination. "Hoffman needs to answer for what he's done, and I aim to make sure he does." "You can't," Rose exclaimed. "He's dangerous, and he has most of the ranch hands loyal to him. They'll back whatever story he tells." "I ain't afraid of George Hoffman or his cronies," Brock replied. "Besides, I won't be going alone." Martha reached over to pat Rose's hand. "While Brock handles that situation, you're welcome to stay here. I could use help around the boarding house if you're willing to work for room and board until you decide what's next." The offer was so unexpected and generous that Rose felt tears threatening again. "I don't know what to say. You barely know me." "I know enough," Martha said firmly. "I know you're a young woman who's been wronged and needs a safe place. My boarding house has always been that for folks who need it." Rose looked from Martha to Brock, overwhelmed by their kindness. "Thank you, both of you." Brock settled his hat back on his head. "I'd best be going. I'll stop back by later, let you know how things went at the Broken Spur." After he left, Martha showed Rose around the boarding house. It was a 2-story building with 6 guest rooms, currently housing only 2 permanent residents, an elderly schoolteacher and a young clerk who worked at the general store. The work would be straightforward, helping with cleaning, laundry, and occasionally cooking. "It's not much, but it's honest work and you'll be safe here," Martha assured her. Throughout the day, as Rose helped with chores, her mind kept returning to Brock Callahan. There was something compelling about him beyond his handsome features, a quiet strength and innate decency that had become rare in her experience. But she couldn't afford to dwell on such thoughts. Men like Brock Callahan didn't look twice at penniless kitchen maids, especially not ones who brought trouble. Evening came with no word from Brock. Martha tried to hide her concern, but Rose could see it in the way the older woman kept glancing toward the window as they prepared supper. "Perhaps he had other business to attend to," Rose suggested, though anxiety gnawed at her. What if something had happened to him at the Broken Spur? What if Hoffman had somehow turned the tables? Just as they were setting the table for the boarders, the front door opened. Brock entered, his clothing dusty from the trail but otherwise unharmed. Relief flooded through Rose, stronger than she would have expected after knowing the man for less than a day. "Mr. Callahan," Martha greeted him. "We were beginning to worry." "Sorry for the delay," he said, removing his hat. "Had more to handle than I expected." His eyes found Rose's. "Hoffman's been relieved of his position, permanently." "What happened?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing he didn't deserve," Brock replied evenly. "I confronted him with what he'd done to you and others before you. He didn't take kindly to the accusation." Brock's mouth set in a grim line. "He drew on me. That was his mistake." The implication was clear. Hoffman had chosen violence and Brock had defended himself. Rose felt no grief for the man who had terrorized her, but she was troubled by the thought that Brock had faced danger because of her. "Was anyone else hurt?" she asked. Brock shook his head. "Some of the hands were loyal to him, but most were just afraid. When they saw which way the wind was blowing, they stood down." He paused, then added, "I've temporarily taken over management of the Broken Spur until my uncle returns. I've sent a telegram explaining the situation." Martha invited him to stay for supper, and despite his protestations about his trail-dusty appearance, he accepted. During the meal, Rose observed him interacting with the other boarders respectful to the elderly schoolteacher, Miss Abernathy, and friendly with young Mr. Porter, the clerk. There was no pretense about him, no hint of the cruelty she'd come to expect from men in positions of power. After the meal, while Martha was busy in the kitchen, Brock asked Rose to step onto the front porch for a private word. The evening air was cool, a relief after the heat of the day. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky above Keeler. "Miss Whitfield," Brock began, then hesitated. "Rose, there's something I need to tell you." The use of her given name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Yes, Mr. Callahan." "Brock, please." He leaned against the porch railing. "When I was at the Broken Spur, I found something in Hoffman's quarters, something that belongs to you, I believe." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver locket on a delicate chain. Rose gasped, her hand instinctively going to her throat where the locket should have been. "My mother's locket," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost it. It must have been torn off when—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "When he attacked you," Brock said quietly, completing her thought. Rose nodded, taking the precious memento from his outstretched hand. "It's all I have left of her. Thank you for returning it." "There's more," Brock continued. "The ranch needs a new cook, and the position is yours if you want it. The pay would be better than what you were getting before, and you'd have proper quarters with a lock on the door." Rose's fingers closed around the locket. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think I can go back there. Not after what happened." Brock nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I thought you might feel that way. That's why I have an alternative to propose. The Double C needs a housekeeper. The previous one left to get married last month, and we've been making do with ranch hands taking turns with the cooking." A slight grimace suggested how well that arrangement was working out. "It's a smaller operation than the Broken Spur, but it's a good place. My uncle trusts me to run it properly." The offer was tempting. Better pay than she could hope for at Martha's boarding house and a fresh start away from the memories of the Broken Spur. But there was one complication. "Would I be working for you directly?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "You would," Brock confirmed. "Is that a problem?" Rose hesitated. "It's just, after what happened with Hoffman, I'm not sure it's wise for me to put myself in a similar position of vulnerability." Understanding dawned in Brock's eyes, followed by a flash of anger that she knew wasn't directed at her. "I give you my word, Rose. You'd never have anything to fear from me or any man at the Double C, but I understand your caution." He thought for a moment. "What if you stayed on here with Martha for a while?" You could ride out to the Double C during the day with one of the hands I'll send to escort you, then return to town each evening. It was a generous compromise, one that showed he had given real thought to her comfort and safety. That might work, Rose acknowledged. Though it seems a great deal of trouble. It's no trouble, Brock insisted. And it would only be temporary until you feel secure enough to judge for yourself whether the Double C is a place you could call home. The word home stirred something in Rose. It had been so long since she'd had a real home, not just a place to lay her head. Since her parents' deaths 3 years ago, she'd been drifting from one position to another, never staying long enough to put down roots. "I'll consider it," she finally said. "Thank you for the offer." Brock smiled, transforming his serious face. "That's all I ask." He straightened, settling his hat back on his head. "I should be getting back. We've got a herd to move tomorrow. I'll send someone for you day after next if you decide to give the Double C a try." After he left, Rose stayed on the porch, looking up at the vast expanse of stars. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something like hope. Brock Callahan had shown her more kindness in one day than she'd experienced in years. But experience had taught her to be wary, especially of kindness that seemed too good to be true. She fastened her mother's locket around her neck, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. Whatever she decided, at least now she had choices, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in far too long. The next day, Rose discussed Brock's offer with Martha. The older woman listened thoughtfully, then offered advice that surprised Rose. "I think you should accept," Martha said. "Brock Callahan is one of the few genuinely good men in this territory. If he says you'll be safe at the Double C, you can trust his word." "You know him well?" Rose asked. "Well enough," Martha confirmed. "He stops in Keeler regularly on ranch business. Always pays his bills promptly, treats everyone with respect, and I've never seen him drunk or disorderly, unlike most cowboys who come through town." She smiled. "Besides, the way he looks at you tells me plenty." Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. "What do you mean?" "Oh, child," Martha chuckled. "That man couldn't take his eyes off you during supper. Not in the way Hoffman did, mind you. There's respect there, but something else too." Rose shook her head. "You're imagining things. He's just being kind because of what happened." "If you say so," Martha replied, clearly unconvinced. But kindness often grows into something deeper, given time and proper tending. Rose changed the subject, but Martha's words lingered in her thoughts. Could Brock possibly be interested in her as more than just someone in need of assistance? The idea seemed far-fetched. He was Thomas Camden's nephew, practically landed gentry by Keeler standards. She was a penniless drifter with nothing to her name but a silver locket and a bundle of threadbare clothes. Nevertheless, when a young cowboy named Charlie appeared the following morning to escort her to the Double C, Rose was ready. Martha had helped her mend her best dress and lent her a shawl to ward off the morning chill. The Double C Ranch lay 6 miles north of Keeler, in a shallow valley blessed with a reliable spring that kept the land greener than much of the surrounding territory. As they approached, Rose could see a collection of well-maintained buildings, a large main house built of sturdy logs, a bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. The corrals held horses in various stages of training, and beyond them, cattle grazed on the hillsides. Charlie, who couldn't be more than 20, had kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation during their ride. "Mr. Callahan runs a tight outfit," he told her. "Best boss I've ever had. Demands a fair day's work but pays well and treats everyone square." Rose nodded, taking in the information while trying to calm her nerves. The ranch looked prosperous and orderly, nothing like the chaotic atmosphere that had prevailed at the Broken Spur under Hoffman's management. Brock emerged from the barn as they rode in, wiping his hands on a cloth. His face brightened when he saw Rose, and he strode forward to help her down from the horse. "You came," he said simply, as if he'd half expected her to change her mind. "I did," she confirmed. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Callahan." "Brock," he reminded her, then turned to Charlie. "Thanks for escorting Miss Whitfield. You can head back to town now and pick up that order from the mercantile." After Charlie departed, Brock gave Rose a tour of the ranch, ending at the main house. It was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with a spacious kitchen, dining room, and several bedrooms. The previous housekeeper had kept things tidy, but there was a distinctly bachelor feel to the place. "My quarters are in the west wing," Brock explained. "You'd have the run of the kitchen and the rest of the house during the day. There are 7 hands who take their meals here, plus me. Nothing fancy required, just good, filling food." Rose surveyed the kitchen. It was well equipped, far better than what she'd worked with at the Broken Spur. "I can manage that," she said, gaining confidence. "When would you like me to start?" "Today, if you're willing," Brock replied. "The men would appreciate a decent meal after weeks of burnt beans and tough biscuits." The day passed quickly as Rose familiarized herself with the kitchen and prepared a simple but hearty supper of beef stew, cornbread, and apple cobbler for dessert. The ranch hands, a diverse group ranging from grizzled veterans to fresh-faced youngsters like Charlie, were effusive in their appreciation. "If I'd known Mr. Callahan was hiring a cook who could make food like this, I'd have applied for the job myself," joked an older cowboy named Frank, prompting laughter around the table. Brock, seated at the head of the table, caught Rose's eye and smiled. "I told you they'd appreciate real cooking." True to his word, Brock arranged for Rose to return to Martha's boarding house after the evening meal was cleared away. Charlie was assigned as her regular escort, riding with her to and from the Double C each day. Days turned into weeks, and Rose settled into a routine. She would arrive at the Double C early, prepare breakfast for the hands, then spend the day managing the household while the men worked with the cattle and horses. Brock was often away on ranch business, but when he was there, he made a point of checking in with her, asking if she needed anything and occasionally lingering in the kitchen to talk. These conversations revealed a man of intelligence and quiet depth. Brock had been educated back east before returning to help his uncle with the family business. He read voraciously books on ranching, history, even poetry, and spoke of his travels with eloquence that surprised Rose. She found herself looking forward to these moments, even as she tried to maintain a professional distance. The bruises from Hoffman's attack had faded, but the wariness remained. Still, it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the flutter in her chest whenever Brock entered a room, or the way his rare laugh made her want to hear it again. One evening in late October, a storm blew in unexpectedly. The sky darkened rapidly as Rose was finishing the dinner preparations, and by the time the men had eaten, rain was falling in sheets, accompanied by fierce gusts of wind that rattled the windows. "You can't ride back to town in this," Brock said as Rose washed the last of the dishes. The ranch hands had retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving them alone in the main house. "It's not safe." "I promised Martha I'd be back," Rose protested weakly, though the thought of riding through the storm was terrifying. "I'll send word to Martha that you're staying here tonight," Brock assured her. "Frank can make the trip. He's ridden through worse." Rose hesitated, acutely aware of how it might appear spending the night alone at the ranch with Brock. Even with the hands in the bunkhouse nearby, tongues would wag in a small community like Keeler. Brock seemed to read her thoughts. "You can have my room," he said. "I'll sleep in the study. Your reputation won't suffer, I promise." There was no real alternative, so Rose agreed. Frank departed with a message for Martha, wrapped in oilskins against the deluge. Brock showed Rose to his bedroom, a large, simply furnished space with a solid bed, wardrobe, and washstand. A bookshelf along one wall held dozens of volumes, and a desk in the corner was neatly organized with ranch accounts and correspondence. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, retrieving a nightshirt from a drawer. "There are extra blankets in the chest if you get cold." Left alone, Rose sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by a strange intimacy. This was Brock's personal space, filled with his belongings, his scent. She ran her fingers over the spines of his books, Shakespeare, Thoreau, Whitman, alongside practical manuals on cattle breeding and horse training. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the valley. Rose changed into the nightshirt, which engulfed her smaller frame and slipped between the sheets. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every crack of thunder made her jump, and the unfamiliar surroundings kept her senses alert. After an hour of tossing and turning, she heard a soft knock at the door. "Rose, are you all right?" Brock's voice was concerned. She sat up, pulling the covers around herself. "Yes, just having trouble sleeping with the storm." The door remained closed. "Would you like some tea? I've just made some." The thoughtful gesture touched her. "Yes, please, that would be nice." A moment later, the door opened just enough for Brock to pass a steaming cup through. She caught a glimpse of him in his shirt sleeves, looking as sleepless as she felt. "Thank you," she said, taking the cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, and that now familiar flutter returned to her chest. "You're welcome." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like company until the storm passes?" "Just to talk," he added quickly. "The study door can stay open so the hands would see if they came in." The request was innocent enough, and the thought of sitting alone in the dark while the tempest raged outside was unappealing. "All right," she agreed. "Let me put on my shawl." They settled in the study, where Brock had made up a makeshift bed on the leather sofa. A lamp burned low on the desk, casting warm light across the room. True to his word, he left the door wide open, positioning himself at a respectful distance from where Rose sat wrapped in her shawl, the nightshirt modest beneath it. "I used to be terrified of storms as a boy," Brock confessed, pouring himself a cup of tea. "My mother would read to me to distract me from the thunder." The mention of his mother prompted Rose to ask about his family, and soon Brock was sharing stories of his childhood on his parents' small farm in Missouri, his education at a boarding school in St. Louis, and his decision to join his uncle in the cattle business rather than pursue a career in law as his father had wanted. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "How did you end up in Keeler?" Rose stared into her tea, considering how much to reveal. "My parents died in a fire 3 years ago," she said finally. "Our farm in Kansas was heavily mortgaged, and when they were gone, the bank took everything. I've been working my way westward ever since, taking whatever positions I could find." "I'm sorry about your parents," Brock said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Rose acknowledged, "but I've survived. Not always comfortably, but I'm still here." "You're remarkable," Brock said, his voice tinged with admiration. "Most women would have given up, found a husband for security or worse." Rose looked up, surprised by the compliment. "I've had offers," she admitted. "None that seemed worth the price of my independence." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the rumble of thunder, now more distant as the storm began to move away. "The rain's letting up," Brock observed. "You should be able to get some sleep now." Rose nodded, though part of her was reluctant to end their conversation. There was something special about this moment, the soft lamplight, the rain pattering on the roof, the quiet intimacy of shared confidences. "Thank you for the tea," she said, rising, "and the company." "Anytime," he replied, standing as well. "Good night, Rose." "Good night, Brock." As she returned to his bedroom, Rose realized it was the first time she'd used his given name without hesitation. Something had shifted between them, a small but significant change that both thrilled and frightened her. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Charlie escorted Rose back to town, where Martha greeted her with knowing eyes but no probing questions. Life resumed its rhythm, but Rose found herself thinking often of that night in the study, of conversations in lamplight and the way Brock had looked at her when he called her remarkable. November arrived with cooler temperatures and preparations for winter. Rose continued working at the Double C, developing a comfortable rapport with the ranch hands and settling more confidently into her role. Brock was increasingly busy with end-of-season tasks, selling off market-ready cattle, ensuring adequate feed for the winter months, and repairing buildings before the first snow. Despite his packed schedule, he made time to speak with Rose daily, often bringing her wildflowers he'd spotted on his rides around the property or books he thought she might enjoy. These small gestures weren't lost on the ranch hands, who exchanged knowing glances but kept their observations to themselves. One crisp afternoon, as Rose was kneading bread dough in the kitchen, Charlie burst in with excitement written across his young face. "Mr. Camden's coming," he announced. "Just got word he'll be here by the end of the week." Rose's hands stilled in the dough. Thomas Camden, Brock's uncle and the owner of both the Double C and the Broken Spur, was returning from his extended business trip back east. The news shouldn't have alarmed her. By all accounts, Camden was a fair and decent employer. But his arrival would change the careful balance that had developed at the Double C. When Brock returned from checking the north pasture, Rose told him she was considering returning to work at Martha's full-time once his uncle arrived. "Why?" he asked, clearly taken aback. "Has something happened? Are you unhappy here?" "No, nothing like that," Rose assured him quickly. "It's just, with your uncle returning, things will change. He might prefer to hire his own housekeeper." Brock's expression softened with understanding. "Uncle Thomas isn't like Hoffman," he said gently. "He'll be pleased with the improvements you've made here. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "he trusts my judgment, and I say you belong at the Double C." The certainty in his voice gave Rose pause. "You really want me to stay?" "More than I probably should admit," Brock replied, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "These past weeks with you here, the ranch has never felt more like home." The confession hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Rose's heart raced as she realized they were approaching a threshold she'd been cautiously circling for weeks. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly, "but I'm afraid to trust it." Brock stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I understand fear, Rose. After what you've been through, trust doesn't come easy. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Just don't leave because you're afraid of what might happen when Uncle Thomas arrives." Rose nodded slowly. "All right, I'll stay at least until I meet him." The relief on Brock's face was palpable. "Thank you. That's all I ask for now." Thomas Camden arrived on Friday afternoon, his stagecoach pulling into the Double Seaticus yard with a clatter of hooves and creaking leather. Rose watched nervously from the kitchen window as Brock greeted his uncle, a tall, distinguished man with silver at his temples and the same blue eyes as his nephew. She had prepared a special welcome dinner, hoping to make a good impression. When Brock brought his uncle inside, she smoothed her apron and straightened her shoulders, determined to appear confident despite her anxiety. "Uncle Thomas, this is Rose Whitfield, our housekeeper," Brock said, a note of pride in his voice. Thomas Camden studied her with keen eyes, then smiled warmly. "Miss Whitfield, Brock has written about you in his letters. I understand you've transformed our bachelor accommodations into something civilized." "I've done my best, sir," Rose replied, relieved by his friendly manner. "And I hear you had a rather unfortunate experience at the Broken Spur," Camden continued, his expression growing serious. "I want to apologize personally for what George Hoffman did. Had I known his true character, he never would have been placed in a position of authority." The sincere apology caught Rose off guard. "Thank you, Mr. Camden. I appreciate that." "Now then," Camden said, rubbing his hands together. "Brock tells me you're an excellent cook. I've been dreaming of a home-cooked meal for months, so I hope you won't disappoint." Rose smiled, her nervousness fading. "I think you'll find dinner satisfactory, sir." The meal was a success, with Camden praising each dish and engaging Rose in conversation throughout. He was well-traveled and well-read, with a quick wit that reminded her of his nephew. By the time they reached dessert, a berry pie that Camden declared the best he'd ever tasted, Rose felt comfortable in his presence. After dinner, Camden asked to speak with Brock privately. Though Rose tried not to eavesdrop as she cleared the table, she couldn't help overhearing snippets of their conversation from the study. "Clearly smitten with her," Camden was saying, amusement in his tone. "Is it that obvious?" Brock's voice, slightly embarrassed. "Only to anyone with eyes," his uncle replied. "She seems like a fine young woman. Have you spoken to her about your feelings?" "Not directly," Brock admitted. "She's been through a lot. I don't want to rush her." "Wise," Camden approved, "but don't wait too long. A woman like that won't lack for suitors once she's ready to consider them." Rose's hands trembled slightly as she placed the dishes in the wash basin. Brock had feelings for her, real feelings, not just kindness or pity, and his uncle apparently approved. It was almost too much to process. When Camden emerged from the study, he asked Rose to join him and Brock in the sitting room after she finished her tasks. The request sent a fresh wave of nervousness through her, but she complied once the kitchen was in order. The two men stood as she entered the room. Camden gestured for her to take a seat, then resumed his place in an armchair by the fire. "Miss Whitfield," he began, "I'd like to discuss your position here at the Double C." Rose's heart sank. Despite his friendly manner, was he going to let her go? "I understand you've been living in town and commuting daily," Camden continued. "That arrangement seems unnecessarily cumbersome, especially with winter approaching." "It was my choice, sir," Rose explained. "After what happened at the Broken Spur, I felt safer with the arrangement." Camden nodded thoughtfully. "Perfectly understandable. However, now that I've returned, I'd like to propose an alternative." He glanced at Brock, who was watching Rose with an unreadable expression. "I'll be taking up residence at the Broken Spur to sort out the mess Hoffman left behind. That leaves Brock here alone, which could lead to perceptions I'm sure neither of you wishes to encourage." Rose felt her cheeks warm at the implication. Camden was right. A young, unmarried woman living under the same roof as a bachelor like Brock would be fodder for gossip, regardless of the reality. "I'm not suggesting you leave your position," Camden clarified. "Quite the opposite. I'd like you to stay on, with a formal contract and increased wages. But to maintain propriety, I'd like to bring in a companion for you, perhaps Mrs. Jenkins from the boarding house. She could have the room next to yours, and you'd have female company as well as a chaperone of sorts." The solution was so practical and thoughtful that Rose was momentarily speechless. "That's very generous, Mr. Camden," she finally managed. "But Martha has her boarding house to run. I couldn't ask her to leave it." "As it happens," Brock interjected, Martha mentioned to me last week that she's considering selling the boarding house. The new hotel in town has taken much of her business, and the building requires more maintenance than she can manage alone. Perfect timing, then, Camden said with satisfaction. We'll offer Mrs. Jenkins a position as housekeeper for the main house, while you'd oversee the kitchen and meal preparation. Between the two of you, this place might finally achieve some semblance of civilization. His eyes twinkled with good humor. The proposal was more than fair, it was ideal. Rose would keep her position, gain a friend and ally in Martha, and be able to stay at the Double C without risking her reputation. Still, she hesitated, sensing there was more to this arrangement than Camden was explicitly stating. "Why go to such trouble for me?" she asked directly. "Surely there are other housekeepers who would be less complicated to employ." Camden exchanged a glance with Brock, then smiled at Rose. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in my nephew's happiness, and he's been happier these past weeks than I've seen him in years." Brock cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "What my uncle is trying to say, in his less than subtle way, is that your presence here means a great deal to me personally, Rose. But I want whatever arrangement we make to protect your reputation and respect your boundaries." The honesty in his voice touched Rose deeply. Here were two men of means and influence going out of their way to accommodate her comfort and safety, treating her with a respect she'd rarely experienced. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'd like to discuss the idea with Martha, but if she's agreeable, then I accept your proposal, Mr. Camden." Camden beamed. "Excellent. I'll draw up the contracts tomorrow. Now, if you'll excuse me, the journey has tired me out." He rose, nodding to both of them before retiring to the guest room. Left alone with Brock, Rose felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The unspoken feelings between them had been acknowledged, at least obliquely, but what happened next? "You don't have to accept, you know," Brock said quietly. "If any part of this makes you uncomfortable, we can find another solution." Rose met his gaze steadily. "I want to stay, Brock. These past weeks at the Double C have been the happiest I've had in a very long time." Relief and joy spread across his features. "I'm glad to hear that." He hesitated, then asked, "May I call on you properly? Not as your employer, but as a man who admires you greatly and would like the chance to know you better." The formal request, so respectful and traditional, brought a smile to Rose's face. "Yes, you may," she replied, her heart light with a newfound hope. Martha was delighted by Camden's proposal. As Brock had mentioned, she had been considering selling the boarding house and welcomed the opportunity for a new start at the Double C. Within a week, she had found a buyer and packed her belongings, ready to join Rose at the ranch. With Martha installed in the room adjacent to hers, Rose settled into life at the Double C permanently. The ranch hands accepted the new arrangement without comment, though Rose occasionally caught them smiling when Brock sought her out during the day for brief conversations, or brought her small tokens from his rides: a pretty stone, a book of poetry from town, wildflowers that somehow survived his saddlebag. As winter descended on the valley, life at the ranch took on a cozy rhythm. Evenings were spent in the sitting room, with Brock reading aloud while Rose and Martha sewed or mended. Sometimes Camden would ride over from the Broken Spur, bringing news from town and enjoying the family atmosphere that had developed in his absence. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for the holiday. Rose and Martha decorated the main house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and planned a feast for the hands who wouldn't be traveling home for the holiday. Brock made mysterious trips to town, returning with packages that he secreted away in his study. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner with Camden and the hands, Brock asked Rose to join him for a walk, despite the cold. Martha gave her knowing smile as Rose wrapped herself in a warm shawl and stepped out into the crisp, star-filled night. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small rise overlooking the ranch, where the buildings glowed with lamplight against the darkness. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over the snow-dusted landscape. "It's beautiful," Rose breathed, her words forming small clouds in the frigid air. "It is," Brock agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the view. "Rose, there's something I want to give you, a Christmas gift, but more than that." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small box wrapped in silver paper. Rose took it with gloved hands, her heart beginning to race. Carefully, she unwrapped the package to reveal a velvet jeweler's box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," Brock explained softly. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Rose looked up at him, her eyes wide with emotion. "Brock, I love you, Rose," he said simply. "I think I started falling for you that first night when you fainted in front of the silver strike with bruises on your face and still managed to look at me with such dignity and courage. Every day since then has only deepened my feelings." He took her gloved hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long, and I'll understand if you need time, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable and my feelings are true. I'm asking you to consider becoming my wife when you feel ready." Tears sprang to Rose's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. The barriers she had carefully maintained around her heart crumbled in the face of his honest declaration. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. After everything that's happened, it seemed impossible that I could find someone like you." "Is that a yes?" Brock asked, hope evident in his voice. Rose nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need security or protection, but because I love you and want to build a life with you." Brock's face lit up with joy. He removed the ring from its box and slid it onto her finger over her glove. "It'll fit better without the glove," he said with a chuckle, "but I don't want your fingers to freeze." Rose laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "We can check the fit when we get back to the house." Brock pulled her gently into his arms. "May I kiss you, Rose Whitfield?" "I've been wanting to for weeks now." "I'd like that very much," she replied, tilting her face up to his. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tender and reverent, a promise of the love and respect that would form the foundation of their life together. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless despite the cold. "Merry Christmas, Rose," Brock whispered. "Merry Christmas, Brock," she replied, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. They returned to the house hand in hand, where Martha and Camden were waiting in the sitting room, pretending not to watch for their return. One look at their radiant faces told the story, and congratulations were immediately offered along with hot cider to ward off the chill. "I had a feeling this was coming," Camden said, clapping his nephew on the shoulder. "Couldn't have chosen better, my boy." Martha hugged Rose tightly. "I told you kindness often grows into something deeper," she reminded her with a wink. They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the valley, and the double sea was at its most beautiful. The ceremony took place under a canopy of blue sky, with Camden officiating and the entire ranch in attendance. Rose wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her make, with her mother's locket around her neck and wildflowers in her hair. As she and Brock exchanged vows, Rose thought back to that terrible night at the Broken Spur, when George Hoffman's cruelty had driven her to flee into the darkness. What had seemed like the end of her hopes had become the beginning of a new life she could never have imagined. The bruises that had once marked her body had long since faded, replaced by the gentle touches of a man who treasured her strength as much as her softness. Their reception was a joyous affair, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. When they finally retired to the main house, now truly their home, Brock carried Rose across the threshold as tradition demanded. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the sitting room that held so many memories of their courtship. "Home," Rose repeated, savoring the word. "I never thought I'd have a real home again or someone to share it with." Brock's arms encircled her waist. "You have both now, for as long as we live." As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, Rose and Brock settled into married life with a happiness that seemed to touch everyone around them. The Double C thrived under their joint management, Brock handling the ranching operations while Rose oversaw the household, and increasingly, the business accounts, where her natural intelligence and attention to detail proved invaluable. Thomas Camden, seeing the ranch in such capable hands, spent more time at the Broken Spur, gradually transforming it from the harsh place it had been under Hoffman into a property as well run as the Double C. Martha stayed on as housekeeper, becoming like family to the young couple and a beloved aunt to the ranch hands. A year after their wedding, Rose gave birth to a son they named James Thomas Callahan, after both their fathers. As Brock placed the infant in Rose's arms for the first time, his eyes shining with love and pride, she marveled at how complete her happiness had become. "He's perfect," Brock whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "He is," Rose agreed, her heart overflowing with love for both her husband and their child. "And he'll grow up in a home filled with love and respect. The kind of home every child deserves," Brock said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As James grew from infant to toddler, the Double C expanded as well. Brock purchased adjacent land, increasing their holdings and allowing them to hire more hands. Rose's kitchen became famous throughout the county for its hospitality, and the Callahan home was often filled with visitors, neighboring ranchers, travelers passing through, and friends from town. 2 years after James's birth, Rose gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named William and Elizabeth. Their family complete, Rose and Brock poured their energy into raising their children and building their legacy. The years passed in a blend of ordinary days and special moments, first steps and first words, cattle drives and holiday celebrations, quiet evenings by the fire and lively gatherings with friends and family. Through it all, Rose never forgot how close she had come to a very different life, or how one man's kindness had changed her fate. On their 10th wedding anniversary, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Brock presented Rose with a leather-bound journal. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Open it," he urged. Inside, in Brock's neat handwriting, was the beginning of their story, how he had found her that night in Keeler, bruised and desperate but still standing. He had recorded everything, from their first meeting to their wedding day and beyond. "I want our children to know how brave their mother is," Brock explained. "How she faced cruelty and hardship but never let it harden her heart. How she built a beautiful life from the ashes of what could have destroyed her." Tears filled Rose's eyes as she read his words. "You're the one who saved me," she said softly. Brock shook his head. "No, Rose, you were already saving yourself when I found you. I just offered a hand when you needed one." He cupped her cheek gently. "You've given me more than I could have dreamed of: a true partner, beautiful children, a home filled with love." Rose leaned into his touch, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had created together. I love you, Brock Callahan, more with each passing day. And I love you, Rose Callahan, he replied, drawing her into his arms, now and always. As they held each other in the quiet of their home, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, Rose knew with absolute certainty that the frightened young woman who had fled the broken spur that terrible night had found not just safety, but a love that would endure for a lifetime. Their story, which had begun with bruises and fear, had transformed into one of healing, strength, and enduring love, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of kindness to change a life forever. For Rose and Brock Callahan, the journey that had started in darkness had led to a life filled with light, proving that even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, love could take root and flourish against all odds. The Double C Ranch remained their legacy, passing eventually to their children and grandchildren, but the true inheritance they left behind was the example of their marriage, a partnership built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a love that had seen beyond circumstance to the person within. In the annals of Keeler's history, many stories would be told of cattle barons and gunfights, of drought and prosperity, but none would shine as brightly as the tale of a brave young woman and the cowboy who had seen her worth when she needed it most.